Alrighty, well, we're going to go ahead and get started with our webinar this morning. Again, thank you so much to everyone who is taking the time to be here with us today. My name is Erica, and I'm a prevention specialist working on a project called the Prescription Playbook. For those who may not be familiar, the Prescription Playbook is a statewide opioid response grant recipient, and we are a campaign and education awareness project that's just trying to help reduce overdose deaths throughout the state of Illinois. And we do that by connecting with coaches, parents, adolescents and community members to educate them on not only the importance of proper prescription medication use, but also avoiding things like counterfeit pills, harmful substances. And we are super excited to be joined with Sarah Wright, have Sarah Wright here with us today. And Sarah is going to be talking about the importance of fueling athletes' brains and their bodies and the role that nutrition plays into sport nutrition, performance recovery, and longevity. If you guys have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to put them in the chat. We can try to either answer those as we go or towards the end if we don't get to see them throughout the webinar. But please don't hold back. We love the engagement. So with that, we're going to go ahead and introduce Sarah and get started. Sarah, if you want to start sharing your screen, you can tell a little bit about yourself and we can get started.
Sure. Let me pull up here. Okay, are we able to see okay on everyone's end?
Yes, we can see great, Sarah.
Okay. Let me just... Alrighty, if at any point you are unable to see, please let me know because I know people are there, but it feels like I'm just kind of talking to my computer a little bit. So I just want a heads up if that is a challenge. So welcome everyone for coming. Thank you for taking time out of your day. I super appreciate it. I was really excited about this opportunity when it presented to talk to people who work directly with high school student athletes. Little bit of background on me. So I am the director of sports nutrition at Illinois State University. I know that picture on there is on the Leatherneck field at Western Illinois University. That's where I did my undergrad, and that's when our football team played their football team. So that was a sweet memory for me. So I have been here 2.5, almost 3 years now. And before that, I worked in clinical and hospital settings and long-term care. So I've been a dietitian for 8+ years now. And this truly is my dream job. I mean, what other job can you go stand sideline of a football game and get paid for it? And so super exciting. I grew up playing sports. I was a four-sport athlete and then tailored that down to play my core sport, which was soccer, and have coached. So I've been on the coaching side and seen just the tremendous impact and personally how coaches have impacted my life as well. So I think this is a really unique opportunity to get to speak with you all. And yeah, we'll go ahead and get started. So today I want to talk about like why do I have this job, right? Like why is sports nutrition important? But then also looking at the composition and some kind of key takeaways and themes that I see in my athletes, especially my young athletes who come as freshmen who are just fresh off of high school. And then some things that are constantly kind of asked of me that I'm seeing thematically, and how we can kind of like pull it all together to best support the health first and foremost of a high school athlete, and then also fine tune their nutrition for performance and recovery. And also understanding, some high school athletes want to, this is kind of their time for sports and maybe they'll do intramurals later, all the way up to supporting ones that may go Division I, or even at ISU, we've had athletes. I mean, we have someone who's playing on the Ravens right now. So kind of cool. And I think in the high school realm is super, super important because they're at such a pivotal time of developing habits that are going to last their lifetime and in their growth and development. So on the bottom bullet point there, I kind of mentioned some things about how important their development is. And about 40 to 60% of their bone mass is accrued and almost 90% by age 18. which is just kind of wild. And so if we're not having proper nutrition, that can even stunt growth. It can be very severe and have very significant impacts. 50% of the adult body weight is obtained in adolescence on average. And I think something that is unique with nutrition in this population, not even getting to the sports piece yet, is there become more distinct differences between men and female. I'm not going to go through the whole fun part of puberty. We all probably lived it at some point. But nutritionally, things can be a little bit more tailored, which we'll get into on the differences between men and women and how they develop and how their bodies change, fat mass, muscle mass, obviously their height, but different hormone production and how nutrition is so, so important for that. Some other ways we tie in nutrition and the importance into sport is it not only gives us energy, right? That's what food does, but it can support mentally. I think that piece is overlooked a lot in how important their cognition is, not only for their school, but also really for their sport if they can't be tuned in because they just don't have enough energy in their body. And they have a lot of external stress, more so than I had in high school, that's for sure, with just the social media use and the demands that are put on them, and then the post-COVID aftermath. So nutrition is also super important for enhancing recovery, training adaptations, absolutely vital with strength and muscle growth. We can't grow muscle if we don't have adequate food and especially adequate protein. That is one of the two factors that stimulates muscle growth, the other one being resistance training. Adequate nutrition can help maintain a healthy weight and body composition, help with the immune system. If a kid is getting sick a lot, that could be an indicator of poor nutrition or just they got the bad luck of the draw with genetics a little bit. Graph over here that I have listed, wanted to highlight that while I love sports nutrition, I love being a dietitian, I very much understand it as a piece of the puzzle. It is not the whole puzzle, right? Like someone can be doing really awesome with their training, what their coaches have, their prescription laid out in that regard. But if they're not sleeping, they're not managing their stress, maybe there's some personal lifestyle factors going on, and then their nutrition, if those things aren't on board, yes, the training is going to help, but it's only going to go so far. Vice versa, someone's nutrition is out of this world amazing, but they're missing some of these other factors. They are going to be lacking in their optimal performance and peak ability. So a little bit of why, so we talked about, why sports nutrition is important. Looking at how, the composition is what we're going to get into for a few minutes here. And I wanted to just highlight when I hear or see the word calorie, I think a big education piece we can do with athletes is train them that that is energy. We don't need to be necessarily choosing low calorie, no calorie. Calories are just energy. And if we reframe it like that, would I want to, as an athlete, before going to train in the afternoon after school, have something that's low energy or high energy? Now, yes, there can be differences on things that, might have added sugars or be high calorie but low nutrient value. But kind of just that neutrality piece that like calories are not bad. Okay. Simply the fuel that we're putting in our tank. We'll get back to this plate in a minute. Wanted to highlight when people just so education piece, if you hear, people you work with or your athletes, macronutrients simply mean macro, they contain energy. That means they have calories. They give our bodies energy so we can make ATP and do other functions. That includes protein, carbs, and fats. We also have micronutrients. While equally as important and vital for our bodies, they do not contain energy. So vitamins, minerals, water. So I want to just briefly touch on our macronutrients. I love talking about carbohydrates. I will die on a hill about carbohydrates because they need to be the backbone of our diet. They are the body's preferred source of energy. They are the easiest macronutrient that is put into ATP. ATP is what we need to move our body every day, especially when we're doing high intensity training, resistance training, any kind of that sort. So, carbohydrates are also especially important when we look around fueling before and during. So I don't, and this may sound like, kind of a joke, but I mean, I did have this one time. I don't necessarily want an athlete to be eating a piece of fried chicken before they go lift or run. Want them to be having more simple carbohydrates, such as banana, applesauce, graham crackers, granola bars, dry cereal, because that is going to give their body fresh energy for that training regimen to delay their depletion of stores. So we can store carbohydrates, which is great because we can't keep up eating while we're training, and you're probably not going to feel good if you're eating a ton necessarily while you're training as well. And fun fact, the brain, the only source of fuel we use for our brain is glucose. And so even if someone's on a high fat diet, high protein diet, hear it all the time, their body just has to work harder to move that protein and fat into glucose to get into our brains. So that is why sometimes, you'll hear like people who maybe are dieting or not eating adequately, especially carbohydrates cutting, like that brain fog, that cognition. So it's extremely important for that aspect alone. Some foods that have carbohydrates, we like to think of like our breads, our grains, our pasta, but also like potatoes, sweet potatoes, beans, and corn here in the Midwest. That is here ample in ample amounts. Also, fruit and some dairy have carbohydrate. And obviously, it's in a lot of different like processed foods, anything from a grain, right? Anything from Pop-Tarts to cereal. Rice is another one I did not mention. So, carbohydrates should be the backbone and make up at least half of our diet. Moving into protein. This one I think is what a lot of athletes will think is very, very important. And it is very important. We cannot store protein throughout the day, different than carbohydrates. However, um, that is why it's important that we have it throughout the day. But a lot of times I'm seeing athletes who are doing it with protein shakes, protein bars, protein fortified foods. That's fine. It has a time and a place. But when we're skimping on actual quality protein sources, meaning from whole foods such as meat, fish, dairy, eggs, some plant sources such as soy products, beans, nuts, peanut butter, quinoa, edamame, things like that, we are lacking a lot of the other nutrients that are in those foods. So it is ideal to get our nutrition from food first over fortified foods, but it does have a time and a place. So like having a protein shake or even simply a glass of chocolate milk after you train can be really beneficial. But if we're relying on those things and we're not eating adequate meals, that's when it can become problematic. So protein, exceptionally important. Hear me say this throughout the day. And this is where I think a lot of us, a lot of the athletes get to the end of the day and they're like, oh, like my mom, like I'll have, my steak, potato, or whatever. But we need it throughout the day and especially that morning time, because if you think about it, you're fasting all night, not eating. And so your body gets out of that anabolic window, which is about 3 to 5 hours, and starts going into a catabolic state, meaning taking energy from your muscles. So having something before bed to top off and then in the morning is exceptionally important. Protein recommendations are similar to adults on the lower end of that 1.2 to 1.4 or 5 would be more for your endurance athletes, those who are trying to gain muscle and maybe a higher impact. I think maybe like wrestling or football, for example, maybe even baseball, like being on the higher end of that. Briefly wanted to talk about fat. I think fat is largely overlooked and it is exceptionally important in adolescence because their bodies are changing, their body composition, their fat, and their muscle. Fat does not make you fat. Fat is essential for hormone production, and during puberty, that is kind of going crazy and a lot of developing in that regard. So having adequate hormones also leads to, if you think about it, muscle protein synthesis because we're going from testosterone, which helps build muscle in men and women. So macronutrients of fat, they are a little bit more energy dense, meaning they have more calories per gram. So we don't need them as in large amounts, but we still do need them. They also aid in vitamin and mineral absorption, vitamins A, D, E, and K. They are the lining of every cell membrane. And I thought it was interesting, 60% of our brain is fat. So having adequate fat in our diet is going to support a healthy brain. So we do get it from some healthy sources are going to be some dairy products, olive oil in particular, avocados, fatty fish, nuts. We do, when you see the white on the outside of a steak, that's what we call saturated fat. So we don't necessarily want a ton of that. But if we're taking away all of those products, we're also missing other nutrients in those foods. So it's about amount and dosage. And then also realizing in our food system in America, we add fat to a lot of foods to make them more shelf stable and a little bit more tasty. And that keeps us coming back for more. So being mindful of fat that is in processed foods as well. Micronutrients, again, to review, they do not provide our body energy, but they are absolutely essential. They help those macronutrients turn into ATP for energy and also helping with repair, growth of a lot of our tissues, our muscles, our bones, being very important for our immune system and in particular inflammation and muscle soreness in relation to antioxidants. Particularly important for oxygen production and red blood cell production. And why that matters is red blood cells takes oxygen to our working muscles. If we're not able to have ample stores of red blood cells, our muscles aren't going to be able to work at optimal ability. Some key areas of concern, especially in athletes overall, but in adolescents, is going to be iron. So iron is becomes in adolescence when girls start having menstruation, losing blood, right? So women need double the amount of iron than men do. And a lot of the population I work with, at least, it's more men who are the larger meat eaters in general. So I do a lot of education about the importance of iron. I do see a higher prevalence of iron deficiency or anemia in the running population. There's a condition called foot drop hemolysis where someone is pounding the ground a lot, like a cross country runner. They can break up red blood cells in the body, and that's going to release some iron. So, not saying that all cross country runners or endurance runners are going to have anemia, but it's something to be aware of that that's going to be of a higher increase in those sports. Vitamin D and vitamin D in particular, it's hard to get enough from food. Best source is that sun outside. Now, when it's 20 degrees, I'm not going outside to get necessarily my sun. I might be going outside with my dog, but I'm all bundled up. So being aware if you have a sport that is primarily inside and just being mindful of the winter months. And hear me when I say this, I'm not saying everyone needs to go on a vitamin D supplement, but if you are starting to have some abnormal symptoms in an athlete, taking to a doctor, an athletic trainer, to assess whether a blood draw would be necessary to diagnose any kind of vitamin D deficiency because it is very prevalent and even increasingly so as more of us sit inside than be outside. Calcium, extremely, extremely important. I love when I get athletes who are like, yeah, my mom made me drink like a glass of milk every night with dinner. And I was like, I love your mother so much. Because if we go back to that first slide, thinking the majority of our bones are formed by the age 18, and calcium is extremely important. That's where the calcium is stored. So if someone is not getting enough calcium, even if, we have adults on here and you're not getting enough calcium as you're older, your body's really efficient at keeping a homeostasis. So calcium, we're going to keep a homeostasis in the blood. It's just going to go to your bones if you're not putting it in your body. And over time, and this is hard to kind of relate to 18-year-olds of like, you're going to increase your risk of osteoporosis, fractures, bones broken. So it can be kind of hard because they may not like see this right away. But I have seen it where big red flag for me is if someone is coming in and has multiple bone stress fractures, reactions, bone breaking. Some of it may just be, poor luck of the draw, but there also could be a fueling aspect to calcium as well. Calcium and vitamin D, because they fortify vitamin D in dairy products, dairy is the most abundant source. I actually just spoke on the statistic that it would take 33 cups of spinach to meet your calcium needs. That sounds horrifying to me. So I'd rather just have some yogurt or some cheese on my burrito or a glass of milk instead. And then antioxidants. Antioxidants are really important because when we work out, when we train, we put inflammation on our body. That is good. That helps us break down muscle to build new muscle and make training adaptations. However, if we're not putting in adequate nutrition and especially antioxidants, that can turn into chronic inflammation, which is not going to be helpful for our organs or our muscles. So understanding, caveat to the micronutrient, we don't want to just throw out supplements to throw out supplements. I take a very individualized approach. Um, but if someone is deficient, it can definitely impact their performance. So being aware of that piece, not just supplementing, because I said these nutrients are of concern, but if someone is deficient in these, then it definitely is helpful because these, especially iron, vitamin D, can directly impact performance. And speaking on inflammation, wanted to just list a few anti-inflammatory foods on here. So these are going to be really nutrient dense foods, okay? Call them superfoods if you will, but just have a lot of phytonutrients that are really beneficial for our bodies. So give you a second just to read through those and we'll go through them all. So putting this all together after speaking on the composition of our meals, when we put it all together, right? Like sometimes we have pizza or we have a burrito or we have a stir fry, right? So this is like a cute little pretty plate of everything separated nicely. But I mean, it can be as easy as if I have an athlete who has spaghetti with meatballs and they have a side salad. We're looking at, are they getting carbohydrate? Very, very important. So like here in the picture, the rice blend it looks like, or if my example spaghetti would be the pasta, then are we getting protein? Again, we don't store protein or we don't store protein, so we need it throughout the day. So in this picture, it's the beautiful salmon, but any kind of protein source, we just need protein in the meal. And then looking at color. So I didn't mention specifically fat because often these other foods do have fat, or we cook vegetables or grains with oil, or we put butter on our bread necessarily, or the meat in itself or the dairy has some fat. So the other component, and this is something, I mean, I preach this to all my athletes, they know, what do you need in a meal? Protein, carb, and color, a fruit or a vegetable. It's a really easy way to remember it. And again, doesn't have to look like a pretty plate. Like if it's pizza, it's pizza. Could we add some baby carrots on the side or steamed broccoli at the table or even an apple? After sharing about like composition of our meals, that does not mean anything if we are not consistent with eating throughout the day and we're not getting enough. Okay. So, what I mean by getting enough is I've told many of my athletes, I would rather you eat McDonald's than eat nothing. Okay. Your body needs a lot of fuel and energy, and eating something is better than eating nothing. Yes, ideally, I don't want you to go to McDonald's every day, but I'd rather you do that than not eat. When we look about putting it together, that's why I kind of recommend those 3 to 4 meals in a day and snacks throughout the day, looking to eat every 3 to 4 hours if possible, if not 3 to 5, because I understand that can be challenging depending on their class schedule and their training schedule. But always packing snacks with you is super, super important because they are super busy throughout the day and they're not home necessarily as much. So when you look around fueling for competition or practice, you want to eat 3 to 4 hours beforehand. And we don't want a meal that's super high fat or super high fiber because those things take longer to digest in our stomach. So don't really want fried chicken. Probably wouldn't recommend a real spicy Asian dish. Wouldn't recommend also a big salad because that's not gonna maybe have enough carbohydrates in it, but it's also gonna take a long time to digest and break down when we don't want extra stress to be on the stomach when we're about to go compete. Looking at 30 to 60 minutes beforehand, kind of that topping off. It's kind of like if you picture you're going on a 2 hour road trip and you put gas in your tank before you leave, by the time you get to that your destination, you've used a little bit of fuel, right? No, you're not like totally even probably at halfway of your fuel tank, unless your car may be very old. But when you get there, being like, I'm going to top off just so I'm ready to go, either wherever we're going to go in that road trip with my friend or whatever, or on the way back. So topping off with some simple carbohydrates, and especially if people, athletes are having morning training, having that simple carbohydrate before. A lot of athletes don't want to eat breakfast. And like if I was waking up and going at 6 a.m. to the swimming pool, I probably wouldn't want to either. So not asking them to eat a whole breakfast, have something. put a granola bar in your mouth, put a bagel with peanut butter if you want, and then having something on the hind end. As long as we're getting something in, that is going to be the most important. I do have a lot of athletes that come to me and say, Sarah, I can't eat breakfast. It's gonna upset myself. I can't do it, right? You can do it. It's just training your stomach. It may not feel great at first, but once you get in a habit and choosing foods that are easy on the stomach that work for you, and then time after time they come back, I feel so much better in my training. I'm like, wow, who would have thought? Wanted to provide a few examples of what a pregame meal might look like. And again, looking at that protein, carb, and color. So just wanted to list a few examples here of some quality options. I did a breakfast option of oatmeal on there as well. But looking at foods, again, the carbohydrates, especially getting those in. It's going to be your main substrate when we're training. This is a big slide, lots of snack options. Just wanted to provide some guidance for athletes looking for snacks, right? So, wanting to pair ideally, if you can, protein with carbohydrate. And then obviously, I'll get into a second here, a little bit of the adequate hydration piece. But um, a lot of different options out there. I just listed a few so we can have some to give to our athletes. I'll take a beat for a second. Is there any questions so far? And I'm happy to keep rolling if we want to wait till the end. Okay.
Yeah, Sarah, sorry, could not press unmute. We do have one question. So right now there seems to be just within like society, and I feel like even on social media, a lot of talks about protein, just getting enough protein, things like protein shakes, and just a big focus on protein. But how much protein is too much, and what can be the impact on the body when you're over prioritizing one thing, and maybe not getting enough of something else, or just not having great sources of protein?
hmm So when we look at protein, ideally, and this is it's very size dependent, meaning the body weight of the athlete and their goals. Ideally trying to get 20 to 40 grams in at a time in like a meal, even if a snack is like 15 to 20. And again, it's spreading it out throughout the day. Um, if we are prioritizing or only eating like more protein and less of the other foods, your body, there is no performance benefit when you're in the training, right? So your body can use protein and fat for ATP. It has to work a lot harder though to get it. And so if you're delayed in getting that energy in your training, you are going to see actually performance decrements because you're not having as much energy as quickly. Your body has to take longer to do that. So we want to be careful of looking at, deficiencies if we're not getting adequate carbohydrates. And then also just the lack of energy. It would be my main concern. And a lot of those protein shakes and supplements, which I'm saying, shakes are fine. I give protein shakes to my athletes after they lift every single day of my life. But some of the protein fortified foods can also have a lot of preservatives and a lot of, one thing I see is sugar alcohols, which is a no calorie sweetener, but causes a lot of stomach distress, like a lot of stomach challenges. Not everyone, but dose dependent. So, missing out on some of those important micronutrients, for example, if you were to eat chicken or steak and get some iron in there. Does that answer?
Yes, thank you. And then we did just get another question in the chat. So just regarding pre-workout snacks, would an apple, banana, or fruit be less effective than potentially something like a granola bar, since fruit usually has more fiber and slows down digestion?
Mhm. So it can be. I would be choosing the lower fiber fruits. So an apple may have four, a pear may have 4 to 5. A banana usually has 2 to 3, especially if it's a little bit more ripe. So looking at maybe apple sauce instead of a full apple, because that skin is where the fiber is, or grapes. The berries I wouldn't necessarily recommend because they are more fibrous, especially strawberries and raspberries. So something like a go-go squeeze, a banana, grapes, even if you wanted to unpeel your apple or a pear. But having that granola bar and making sure it is a true granola bar, not like a protein bar necessarily, can be, I would say, equally beneficial. Just looking at how many grams of carbohydrates, if you're going for, around 30, being mindful of what you'll have to eat there. That's also, I will say, where liquid energy can come in, such as like a Gatorade. That's going to add some simple carbohydrates that are really, no fiber in Gatorade.
Thank you. You're so insightful. This has been great so far. I do have one more question for now. You briefly talked about inflammatory foods or anti-inflammatory foods and the importance of them. What role does focusing on anti-inflammatory foods and nutrition play in recovering from injuries?
Yes. So I will say it also depends if we're talking about an injury with a surgery, because that's going to cause even more inflammation on the body. But very, very important. And that is something I focus on. One, if I'm having an athlete that is having a lot of inflammation, a lot of soreness. But excuse me, my cat decides she should be in on the webinar here. It is very important to include. And I think issue where we come into is our diet in America is very pro-inflammatory, meaning a lot of added fats, a lot of added sugars. So replacing what we can with foods that help with inflammation is going to help and aid in the recovery process. But again, nutrition is a piece of the puzzle. If we're not hydrating, if we're not sleeping, if we're not doing work with therapy or icing, heating, whatever, that's not my realm, so I won't get into that, is all piece of the puzzle. And again, with injury too, a lot of athletes think they don't need to eat a lot because they're not maybe moving as much as they were when they were not injured. And that is absolutely incorrect. Actually, the body may even need more protein than they realize because they're trying to repair and they're not as active. So trying to preserve muscle mass is actually even harder when we have someone with an injury.
Thank you. That's so insightful and could have been really helpful when I had my knee surgeries. If I would have heard that in planning my recovery meals. We did get another question. Is creatine a safe and effective supplement for athletes to use?
I'm gonna table that one until I have a talking point about supplements. So I'll answer that question in just a few, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah, that's great. Those are all of our questions for now, so we will keep it
Yeah.
rolling. Thank you so much for everyone's questions in the chat.
Yeah, keep them coming. So moving into the hydration piece, um, I recently looked at a study and it said over 60%, and this was like a 4 or 500 Division I student athletes, over 60% started in a hypohydrated state before training, which means they were dehydrated, which is the process of losing water. That is really significant. And actually, until I found and I did that research, I was like, I need to be hitting hydration a little bit harder, and just encouraging and reminding student athletes. I didn't realize it was that severe because they all carry these cool like Stanley water bottles, right? Um, but doesn't help if they're not drinking it. So dehydration, can have a lot of detrimental effects on health overall, but it can also just directly impact performance, leading to reduced blood flow, which is how we get oxygen to our muscles. Also, just early fatigue. We don't digest and absorb our food as well if we're not hydrated. Our bodies are 60% water anyway. And then we can also get into an electrolyte imbalance, and this can have direct performance impacts and also be detrimental health-wise. Our body works really hard to keep us in a balance with sodium, potassium, calcium, magnesium, chloride, all electrolytes that we do lose when we sweat. So keeping in mind if we are in the summer versus winter months, inside versus outside, depending on the athlete's clothing, right? Think of a football player with a lot of equipment on their body. Um, Anywhere, if someone, so say I have an athlete who's 100 pounds, if they have a 2% body weight loss at the end of their training, meaning they lose 2 pounds, they're 98 pounds at the end of training, that is dehydration diagnosable. And that is when we see performance decrements that will occur. It's really quite interesting, the research around it. So how can we help athletes meet their fluid needs, right? So a baseline would be about a half to an ounce of water per pound of body weight. Now, this has some nuance, depending on the size of the athlete and their sweat rate. Some athletes just do sweat a lot more than others. Keeping in mind that there are ways to meet our hydration needs, it does not need to be just from water. So milk can be a really good option because milk actually has, aside from protein, calcium, potassium that we lose when we sweat. Sports drinks can have a time and a place and be very beneficial. Juice, tea, and I will get into the next slide here, but even soda and can help us meet our fluid needs. Now, I'm not saying I'm recommending soda, but anything, I mean, the first ingredient, even on a soda or a juice, the first ingredient is going to be water. So those all are hydrating to our bodies. Fruits and vegetables and some other foods do supply the body water as well. Think about a grape to a raisin. Take all the water out, the raisin's left. So fruit is naturally very high in water. Now, do athletes get a lot of fruits and vegetables? Not necessarily. So being mindful of that. And then looking at caffeine. So in a day for adults, we want to stay under 400 milligrams, but in adolescents, we really want to keep them, and I had a little typo there that should say milligrams. My apologies on that one. Under 100 milligrams. So what does 100 milligrams look like? So on average, in like a normal 8-ounce cup of coffee is about 100 milligrams, right? It depends on how it's brewed and where the bean came from, yada, yada. Now, a lot of the athletes I see are getting the venti from Starbucks that has 175 to 300 milligrams, or the matcha that is in very large portions. And then we couple that, say they're doing one of those venti Starbucks, and then they're doing Celsius or an Alani on top of that. They're easily close to 400 milligrams, which isn't even recommended for their age group and is at the top end for adults. And I don't think that they realize how much caffeine is in certain drinks and beverages. I've been at a gas station recently and I saw this girl was in a softball athlete or a softball outfit. She was maybe 14, 13. It was like 7 or 8 p.m. at night. And I see her walking out with an energy drink. And I'm just like, does this mom know this girl? Like, this is not going to help her sleep at all. Like, and people just may not realize, and it's just so prevalent, right? So when we're looking at some beverages just to be leery of, soda, lemonade, fruit punch, a time and a place. If you go out, on Sundays with your family and you want a soda once a week, fine. It's not going to hurt you, right? But over time and having a lot of them, that's a lot of added sugar that has no nutrient value. And I do often think or hear, oh, lemonade's healthier. Lemonade and soda has just as much sugar. They're pretty much equal. Your body doesn't know the difference. So just being mindful of what we're putting in hydration wise there. Energy drinks are not regulated like our food is. So their supplement facts label, they can be accurate, but not necessarily. They don't even have to disclose the amount of caffeine. They can be off by however much they want until they're tested if something was to go awry and the FDA comes after them a little bit. So being very mindful of like energy drinks are not regulated. And so especially if we're looking at the potential of drug testing, this can be problematic. Okay. I will also caveat a fun fact, the NCAA. Caffeine technically is a banned substance. It is a stimulant in that class and it is banned. Now, it is only banned in amounts if someone were to have a urine test having about 500 milligrams about an hour afterward. So, likely pretty low risk. And there is some benefit to caffeine in athletic performance. Again, studied primarily though in adults. We don't have enough data to show that it should be used regularly in adolescents. So, being mindful of that's one that a lot of athletes don't realize that caffeine, because it is a stimulant, can be pop them positive on a drug test, which is obviously detrimental. So, and then realizing if we're relying on energy drinks, remember where we get energy is from calories and from food. So looking at if you're always relying on this external factor to function in the day or to get through practice, what could we be doing differently in our lifestyle habits overall to help our body naturally? Because there was a time when these were not so prevalent and people were still surviving and doing great and setting records. Electrolyte packets, just wanted to mention this is very trendy recently. I'm getting a lot of questions about different electrolyte packets. So some are Great. Some have sodium, potassium, chloride, these things we lose when we sweat. Some are just marketed to sell their product and really don't really have a lot of electrolytes in them. Now, if it helps you drink more water and get more fluids overall, great. But just realizing, asking a healthcare professional, dietitian, doing research to see if what you're putting in your body is worthwhile. Briefly wanted to mention alcohol. Hopefully, our high school athletes are not using alcohol because that would be illegal. But I did want to just mention if you are in contact with any that do, is just providing the education that it's not only dehydrating, but I think, oh yeah, it impacts our sleep, but there's a hormone released when we sleep that builds muscle. And if you're not sleeping adequately, you're not releasing that human growth one factor to promote muscle protein synthesis. So even if you work out, you're like putting yourself in the negative there. Also, we do see an increased risk of injury and illness. Kind of makes sense. Your immune system's not going to be functioning properly. You're going to be prioritizing in the body, metabolizing the alcohol, not the vitamins and nutrients your body needs. But I thought it was really interesting research I read recently about college football athletes and the increased risk of concussions and injury in those who more habitually used alcohol. Briefly wanted to mention, maybe throw a little like thumbs up in the chat if you have. If anyone has heard of relative energy deficiency in sport, also called Red S. If anyone has heard of the female athlete triad years ago, looking at inadequate energy intake and how that affects bone health and menstrual health. But the female athlete triad missed half the population of males. And so this term has come about, I think, in 2014 and has been largely studied since by the IOC of a classification diagnosis that is primarily caused by low energy availability. And again, energy means calories, food. Basically, we're not getting enough food in compared to our output level. So we get this imbalance. And in the short term, not a huge deal, right? Our body can survive. We have stores usually. So we can get by for a little while, but over time, this can be exceptionally harmful. And we'll talk about the consequences here in a second. But some causes of this can be disordered eating and eating disorders. But also, a lot of what I see is I get 18-year-olds who are coming from mom and dad's house, and now they're lifting 3 to 4 times a week. They're training 5 to 6 times a day, or I mean, a week, excuse me. And they don't realize, like, oh, I need to eat more. Like, mom and dad just always had food there, and now I'm making choices at the dining hall, and maybe I'd rather go study with my friend and just have a snack. And they don't realize that that balance can become out of whack really quickly and they're not feeling great and having some symptoms. And so it's not intentional. They didn't even realize like the education piece isn't there. Some consequences of relative energy deficiency in sport. First and foremost, I always look at the health of my athlete, but then also translating that to performance. So a few that kind of stick out that I just wanted to mention briefly here is amenorrhea or low libido in men. For menstrual function, we could see delayed menstruation in young adolescents. I have had one who came to me at age 18 and had never had a menstrual cycle, was very much in this camp of having red S. Also seeing increased bone stress fractures, maybe anemia or other vitamin deficiencies, stunted growth. We also see psychological issues, depression and anxiety, where if we take the athlete out of the sport for a week and make sure they're getting enough, those symptoms go away because they're getting that energy and substrates their body needs. So some common things you can look for in your populations you may work with is any kind of weight loss or changes in height trajectory, BMI percentile, increasing bone stress injuries or soft tissue injuries, amenorrhea or oligomenorrhea, dizziness, feeling like they're going to pass out, fatigue, not sleeping well. Like I mentioned, those psychological factors. And ultimately, if you're just noticing their sports performance is overall poor, this could be. Now, I'm not saying everything on this is meaning an adolescent or a student athlete is having red S. So this really, those who work with athletes directly, coaches in particular or trainers, can really be at the forefront of looking at these symptoms and signs in high school athletes. I mean, you really get to know your students quite well. So you can probably pick up, oh, they're not their normal, like, upbeat self. There could be a lot of factors into that, but if it's looking at over time, that could be an indicator. So, talking about supplements, I briefly mentioned with energy drinks, they are not regulated. So, they do have a regulatory agency, the FDA, but I can go and make a vitamin D supplement if I wanted and put it on the market tomorrow, and I don't have to check with anyone. Now, if someone starts having heart attacks from my vitamin D supplement, then they will come and investigate and see what's going on. So, being mindful that anywhere, even from a multivitamin, while likely is probably safe, is not regulated in that way. So, how can we ensure a better level of safety is looking for third-party tested, which means third-party tested company comes in, they have no financial benefit from the company. They pay this company, they come in, they check their purity standards, their quality, does their label match what's in it? If it does, then they will get one of these kind of stamps of approval. Again, it doesn't mean it's 100% safe, but it does give a a much higher safety than one that is not. So the NSF certified for sport is kind of a gold standard one. You can go on their website, just type in NSF certified for sport. You can type in any supplement you want, and it will show you if it's certified or not. Doesn't mean that all of them that aren't certified are horrible. It's just kind of like the gold standard. But companies have to pay for it. So, they have to be at a good financial standing to even do that. So there are some energy drinks that are now NSF certified for sport. Again, doesn't take into the fact the caffeine amount. It's just saying like what they say is in this product is in this product without additives that they're not disclosing. So always recommend checking your supplements with your doctor, athletic trainer, sports dietitian. And I say this as kindly as I can, but not your friend, coach, or teacher. Parents, I think, um, know a lot of what is best for their children. Absolutely. So checking with parents, especially, but also understanding that like parents didn't have maybe the education that doctors, athletic trainers, sports dietitians do. So just being mindful of like, I do have athletes that are like, oh yeah, like I'm like, why'd you start taking that? Like, oh, my mom like told me to, or grandma told me to, because she started taking it. I'm like, that's great. Probably mean the best. And maybe it's a safe product, but like there's really no benefit to taking it. So always checking if you can and asking your athletes, hey, like, what are you taking? To mention creatine. So creatine is a relatively safe product. It is a supplement. You want to look for creatine monohydrate, typically in that 3 to 5 gram dose. And what it does is when we do a high intensity exercise, a quick lift or sprint, our body needs ATP very quickly, very, very quickly. And what it will do is it will go to our muscles and get creatine to make that ATP. So the more creatine you have, the more energy you can have, and you'll see muscle gain, strength, and output. And those can add up over time to increasing muscle mass. It is not designed to gain weight. Yes, it pulls water into the cell. It's not going to make you gain weight. You may just see a little bit of weight gain initially. We're also seeing cognitive health benefits of creatine. So, creatine we do make ourselves as animals, and then we also eat from animal products if you're an animal consumer. But you would have to eat like 3 pounds of beef to get as much creatine to top off your stores versus taking a very small supplement, and it's very inexpensive. So it is one of the top supplements that I do recommend in my athletes. Um, Briefly, also wanted to talk about opioid drug abuse and nutrition. So just some consequences that can occur. We're going to have disrupted sleep, which again is going to impair recovery in that muscle protein synthesis. We're not going to be able to absorb nutrition or nutrients as well because it's going to be focused on processing that drug in our body, kind of similarly to alcohol. We can see a low appetite, which can lead to weight loss and muscle loss, and especially if we're not eating throughout the day. We do see a lot of gastrointestinal side effects, especially constipation is one of the biggest ones with that delayed gastric emptying with opioids. And again, how we can't absorb our vitamins and minerals as well. We can't utilize carbohydrates as well. Carbohydrates is the main fuel source, lack of ATP, going to fatigue quicker. So to kind of wrap up a little bit, I feel like I went over a lot, so I really welcome questions. Some key takeaways, though, if you remember nothing else, is consistency and adequacy are the kings. Variety and enjoyment are the queens. If someone is not fueling enough and throughout the day, that is my primary focus over looking at the composition. Okay. I would rather someone be eating throughout the day, start them there, and then, hey, can we add in fruits? Can we add in vegetables? Can we add in dairy products? Whatever it may be. Looking to eat consistently. And I like to use the example, take five, if you high five someone, try to get five servings of fruits and vegetables. Now, that can be two fruits, three vegetables. But if you have an athlete that doesn't eat any fruits or vegetables, just start with one. That's better than nothing. Meet them where they're at. And also looking at access. Maybe mom and dad don't cook vegetables because they don't like them. So maybe could they get them at their lunch if that's the only way they can get them in? The 80-20 rule is looking at what are we doing 80 to 90% of our time, right? And our sleep habits and our hydration and our food and our stress. What are we doing the majority of the time? The consistency, the showing up and doing the right things, building the right habits. And absolutely go enjoy pizza or whatever you want on, going out to eat. But do you need to necessarily make those poor choices every day? Or like, oh, Sarah, I really like those Taki snacks. Okay. Can you have them one or two times a week instead of every day? And then bring in some more nutrient dense food. So I'm not about like food shaming, taking food away, not our job. We want to teach food neutrality. All foods truly can fit, dose dependent, right? And then adequately hydrating. So um, yeah, I will open up for questions or any discussion.
Thank you so much, Sarah. You are just so knowledgeable on all the things you're talking about. It's been really awesome to hear you speak on nutrition and everything it has to do with promoting athletic performance. We do have a couple questions. So one being if caffeine has been shown to improve endurance capabilities and athletic performance, what guidelines would you give to athletes around caffeine who are in the high school realm?
So, because they're adolescents and we have a lack of research, ideally, I would not want them to be having much at all because it can help improve endurance. And maybe I misspoke. Doesn't mean that it will, because some athletes it can actually have the opposite because it'll increase jitteriness and anxiousness. We do look at a dosage in college athletes, at least in adults, looking at 3 to 6 grams per kilogram. And so I would try to stick to like 50 to 100, maybe an hour or so before. And that would be probably my recommendation in the adolescents based on the research and the safety. One drink I really like to recommend because it is regulated, because it's in the food category, not a supplement energy drink, is it's called V8 Fusion Energies. They have about 80 milligrams, and then it also has like 13 or 14 grams of carbohydrate that are quickly, easily digestible. And then it has some antioxidants like vitamin C and E. So, but I definitely would never recommend an energy drink. So if it's like a simple cup of coffee or green tea, V8 Energy, those might be examples I would recommend.
The V8s are actually good too. I feel like that's what
Oh
my
yeah.
dad would buy at Costco before when I had like soccer games or dance competitions growing up. I feel like that was like the one thing I got to drink. Okay, another question. So, thoughts on high dose electrolyte intake prior to performance, whether it's Gatorlyte, Drip Drop, or other electrolytes.
So one, it would depend on sweat rate and temperature outside or even inside, and looking at their diet in a whole and seeing if they're getting electrolytes through their diet. But I do think that would be a great idea. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like right before they train. It can be a couple hours before. And then definitely hitting hydration on the hind end is going to be important. But I think that is a great tool to have before. But again, it doesn't have to be right before to have them prepared for when they go through a training. So again, they're starting in a more euhydrated state, meaning a better, like a normal hydration state versus hypohydrated and not having to just play catch up at the end.
Thank you. Another question that we have is how does hydration or a lack of hydration potentially impact mental health?
Oh, that's a great one. That I think plays a significant role. If anyone has ever been dehydrated or in a hypohydrated state, it is more difficult to think clearly. And our brain does have a lot of water in it. And so to me, that makes perfect sense. And also, when you think about like if someone's in a football match or a soccer match and they're at the end, and you've maybe experienced this yourself, when you get so physically tired, the mental faculties are much harder to keep, to be doing the right things, to be doing the right plays or whatever, to be staying mentally tuned in. Part of that is a lack of energy, food, but I think also part of that is the dehydration piece, where they may be able to see it pretty clearly.
Thank you. So another question we have is how can we support athletes when they're out of season? And what role does their nutrition out of season play to when they return to their season, however long it may be in between?
I actually work with a lot of student athletes more in their off season than they are in their on season because that's the time of building the habits. And so helping athletes get into really solid foundation nutrition, eating consistently, eating the variety, the protein, carbs, the color. I think it's arguably the better time to work on your nutrition so you come into the season prepared and have those non-negotiables and have those habits built in place. So I think that's even a better time to hone in on nutrition with them.
Do we have any other questions? Throw them in the chat now if you do. Oh, we just got one. Amazing. My athlete struggles with very picky eating, and also getting full very quickly. Any tips for helping this young athlete overcome this?
So get full very quickly and picky is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Okay, just wanted to make sure I heard that correctly. So that is where one, if they're picky, finding the foods that they do like. Forcing someone to eat something that they hate is only going to make things worse and more challenging. So if there's ways though you can add in certain things like to try to get the protein carb. Does it have to look like a perfect beautiful meal? No, but if we just need them to meet their needs. So looking at the foods that they will eat, creating a list if you will, and being like, okay, well, I'll eat like these 15 things, these I really like, and then identifying, okay, is this more of a protein or a carb, and then like matching those in the list to create a balanced meal. And that's where choosing maybe foods that are lower volume, higher calorie, higher energy, seeds, nuts, adding olive oil to food, also liquid calories, milk, juice, Powerade, Gatorade, smoothies, things that don't make them feel like they're eating necessarily a ton, but it is adding substantial and beneficial calories would be my go-to there.
And then we did get another question asking if you could repeat what the 80-20 rule is.
Yeah. So 80% of what we're doing with our habits and with our nutrition. So if I am eating balanced, healthy meals and snacks and continually fueling and hydrating 80% of the time, stretch it to 90 if you're an overachiever, and then leaving that 10 to 20% to have more, maybe less nutrient dense foods that you really do enjoy. Maybe like you want to have the cake, you want to have the Doritos, or have a soda here and there. So it's getting out of that all or nothing mentality. You don't have to be 100% like locked in with your nutrition and everything is perfect. There should be room for flexibility because that's how life is anyway. Does that answer questions there?
Yeah, I think it does. And then we do have one more question and we're going to wrap up. And just a quick side note while we ask for the last question, if you guys could take our event evaluation and scan the QR code, it would be so appreciated. So that we can get feedback for us, for Sarah, and try to make sure that when we're planning our next webinar, it's something that you are all interested in. But last question being, how can we support athletes who may be prescribed a medication that does cause an appetite suppressant?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I do work with some athletes in that camp. So looking at if you're able to, and comfortable with the athlete, finding out when they take that medication, if you can kind of get a meal in before they have to take it. And so again, this is, individualized when they're taking it. trying to get that meal in with the medication or even before. And then being strategic, and sometimes you have to plan it more. Like you have your calendar for the day, you're going to school, you're going to training, then you may go work or you have a social event. So you put those things in your calendar and you look at your day and then you schedule in the nutrition piece. Okay, at 12 p.m. I have a 30-minute break. I will eat during this time. And then so that way because you can't rely necessarily on hunger cues in that regard. So being mindful of just like scheduling it in.
Thank you. Just all such like helpful information. And so appreciate your expertise on the topic, your knowledge and your experience. You can tell that you one are so caring about all of your athletes' individual needs and the role that that plays in their performance, not just on the field, but probably off the field as well. And again, your expertise in all of this has just been so amazing to hear about and really fun to hear you talk about. Were there any like last closing things you wanted to close us out with?
No, I think my last piece is going to be like, they are at such a pivotal time of their life, mentally and physically, and just supporting them and just seeing them. And from a nutrition aspect is kind of like help support them in their goals, but also realize you're maybe not the practitioner in that regard. So just referring out when you can. I mean, I'm sure everyone doesn't have access to a sports dietitian, but you can utilize like the ASPDA has some great nutrition educational tidbits you can throw your way. I mean, handouts and stuff that are evidence-based. And so just realizing, staying within our scope and just best supporting them and not having that like all or nothing mentality or like, I saw this on TikTok because this professional athlete does it and we should do it. It's like, no, I always joke nutrition isn't sexy, it's the basics.
I love that. Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. We encourage you to visit our website, get connected with us. We do have another webinar coming up with our sister project, the Human Performance Project. So if you scan the QR code to our website, you can get some information on that. But with that, we conclude the webinar. Again, just thank you so much to everyone being on. Thank you so much, Sarah, for being here today and for sharing your expertise with all of us.
You're welcome. Thank you guys.
Take care, everybody. Thank you.